Hello and welcome. What I'd like to do in this video is to configure NAT. What I want to do is look at both dynamic NAT and static NAT. Dynamic NAT will configure, and the R2 device here will be our NAT device, and we have an ISP out here that we're going to try to get to. We have down here a private network addresses that we want to NAT to our public address here. We also have what would kind of sort of at least effectively be our DMZ, an inside server, or a server that we want to allow users from outside to be able to get to. In order to do that, we're going to have to use a static NAT because we want to consistently go to the same network address. So we'll have a public address out here that we go to that gets NATed, translated into the private IP address. Before we do that, the first thing that we need to do is to set up some routing. So the first thing I want to do is go to the ISP router here, and we're going to go in here and configure some routes. So in the config, we're going to do an IP route, a static route going to 209.165.200.240 with a 255.255.255.240 address, and that's going to go out serial 001. What we're doing here with this route is setting a route up to go back to the NATed addresses, so that when we come out, this is going to be part of the static pool as well as the dynamic NAT pool that we'll configure. We also want to try to do a default. We're going to do a default route on the R2 router to bring everything out of it. This one, go back to it, we're set out of the serial interface. When we look here, serial 0001. Now we're going to go to the R2 router, which is going to actually be our NAT device when we get into it. So what we want to do on it is to get into the right area, is to do a default route 0.0.0.0 with a 0.0.0.0, and then we're going to go to it to 209.165.200.226. What that address is, if we get everything contained back into the record area, that's the address on this interface right here. So that's going to be the route to get everything to the ISP. What we also want to try here is router OSPF 1. We're going to configure OSPF to share some routes. We're also going to try to default information, share the default route with the other OSPF routers. Now when I'm still in OSPF 1, I also need to activate the interface, and let me see if I can get in the right area this time. The interface is here. What we want to do is have OSPF to share routes between these two routers. The ISP is going to be static routing only. So when I go back to this one, we're going to have the 10.1.1.0 network is the one that we're going to share. So we will share network 10.1.1.0 with a 0.0.3, since we only want to use the two addresses, wildcard mask, and then this is going to be area 0, because remember that unless we have multi-areas, the first area needs to be area 0. Of course, it does help if you put enough digits into the wildcard mask. Makes it work a lot better. So we should now have that running on this device. Let's now go to router 1 and see if we can get OSPF to work. Router OSPF1 network 192.168.10.0.0.0.0.255. Oh yeah, area 0, and then we'll use the repeat key at 11, and then we're going to have network 10.1.1.0 with a 0.0.0.3 in area 0. And with that, we now have an adjacency established right here. So OSPF should be sharing our routes. And with that, what we should have now on router 1 being shared via OSPF is the default route that'll take all of this traffic from the R1 router to the R2 router, and the R2 router then has a default route to the ISP, and the ISP has routes back to the NATed addresses that we're going to use on this network. So let's take a look at R1, and then the show IP route. We have an OSPF, an external route 0.0.0, which takes us to 10.1.1.2, which is this interface right here. So we have hopefully the routes set up to allow us to now get the traffic back and forth out of and into our network. The next step will be to configure the static NAT on the R2 router. So we'll go into it, and it has the static route, and it has the OSPF routes here too, as you will notice, to the 192.6, the 10, and the 11 networks down there. So the first thing that we want to do is to do our static and out. So we're going to IP NAT, and if you use the help screen, the question mark help screen, which is always, I think, very helpful to do. So we're going to NAT inside the source static STATIC 192.168.20.254, and we're going to NAT it to 209.165.200.254. That should be part of that addressing that we used earlier. So with that, we didn't get any errors, so hopefully we're going to be okay on that one. The next thing that we need to do is to specify the inside and the outside interfaces of this thing. So we'll go on R2, we're into config, go to interface serial 001, which is the one that goes to the ISP, and we will tell it it's the NAT outside, IP NAT outside. And then we'll go to interface FA0/0, which is the internal interface, and it will be the IP NAT. I gotta get the spacing in there, right? NAT inside. But I think I made a mistake on an address. This one I want it to be 254. It's 251, just to keep me from being unconfused. Let's go back and change this address to 254. In order to test that one out, let's go and be really brave here, and let's see if we can ping from here. The 209's got to be the outside address, the external address, .165. 200.254, and with that one we're getting responses. We can also try it here with our built-in little web server. Go to 209.165.200.254, pops right up. We're on the page, small page, hello world back, and then the copyrights for Cisco. So the static NAT is in place that takes us from the outside world, the ISP, through the serial interconnect to our NAT device into our internal server. Next step will be to do the dynamic NAT on here. The first thing that we need to do is to define an access control list that allows the specific addresses out. So we'll do an IP access list extended, extended NAT, and we're going to permit 192.168.10.0 0.0.0.255 to get to any. Permit the IP any, and fortunately Cisco helps me out a lot with my typing and tells me where I make mistakes. So we're going to do the 11. We're going to permit it also. So we've now permitted those two lists, those two network addresses to do that. We also need a pool of addresses, so we're going to have IP NAT pool, and we'll call it my pool, and we're going to allow it to use 209.165.200.241, and it'll go to 209.165.200. Where's going to be the top end of that? It's going to be 246, and it's going to have a net mask of 255.255.255.248. So we now have the pool configured, and we have the access control list. The next thing we need to do is to IP NAT inside from the source, and the source is going to be a list. It's going to be NAT, the access control list that we configured, and the pool is going to be my pool. So okay, I got to spell source correctly with a C and not a D. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is specify the inside interface on this one. We've already specified the outside interface when we did the static NAT. So we're going to interface serial 0/0/0, and it'll be IP NAT inside. The next thing we need to do is check to see if it actually works. So let's go down here to PC1 and bring it down here so we can see it. And let's see if we can ping 209.165.200.226, and with that it does ping. It goes back and forth across the system. So that should have us configure. We can also go in here and do show IP NAT translations, and with that you can see that those are there, that we are actually translating across this thing. With that, NAT appears to be working, and hope this has been useful, and thank you for watching.